When Cody Rhodes defeated Roman Reigns in the main event of Night 2 of WrestleMania 40 on April 7 in Philadelphia, he not only won the WWE Championship, the most prestigious world championship in pro wrestling, he also became the most recent person to hold pro wrestling's real world championship. Or the closest thing an unreal sport has to a real world championship anyway, which is, fittingly, an imaginary championship. I'm talking about pro wrestling's Lineal World Championship. The Lineal World Championship is not represented by a belt or a trophy, nor is it recognized by any organization. Strictly speaking, the title doesn't actually exist. The Lineal World Championship is a concept based on what would be the lineage of the World Championship if every match in which the World Champion competed was a title match, excluding specialty matches like tag team matches or battle royals where a singles championship wouldn't typically be at stake. Because it's an unofficial, hypothetical championship, not everyone agrees on what its exact lineage is, but the most credible version of it I've found traces the history of the Lineal World Championship at least back to 1957, potentially back as far as 1905, and possibly even as far back as 1881, though that last one does require a bit of a leap. Let me explain, starting in 1957. In Montreal, on July 24th of that year, National Wrestling Alliance World Heavyweight Champion Lou Thesz defeated local hero and fellow wrestling legend Edouard Carpentier by disqualification to retain the title. Thesz was not only the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, he was also the last man to be recognized as the undisputed World Heavyweight Wrestling Champion, as, in addition to the NWA title, he was also the last to hold the Los Angeles version of the World Heavyweight Championship, which he won in 1952, and the National Wrestling Association version of the world title, which he won in 1948. The Los Angeles and National Wrestling Association versions of the championship had been unified with the National Wrestling Alliance title and deactivated when Thesz won them, following the match with Carpentier in Montreal, which was held to resolve a dispute over who was the rightful champion after Carpentier defeated Thesz in a previous match due to Thesz sustaining an injury and not being able to continue, which is a whole other complicated story that I don't want to get into here, which led to Carpentier being recognized as yet another version of the world champion, though most of the NWA promoters continued to recognize Thesz. I said I don't want to get into it here. The important bit for our present discussion is that after the Thesz-Carpentier match in Montreal on July 24th, 1957, the original version of the World Heavyweight Wrestling Championship was retired and merged with the NWA World title. Lou Thesz had been recognized as a holder of the original version of the World Championship when he unified those three other titles I mentioned to become the undisputed champion. Prior to Thesz, the last holder of the original world title was Jim Londos, the Golden Greek, who retired as champion in 1946. Continuing backwards through the history, the title was also held by such familiar names as Bronco Nagurski, Dick Schickat, Stanislaus Zbyszko, Joe Stecker, Ed Strangler Lewis, and Frank Gotch. Well, okay, familiar names to wrestling history nerds, though I bet a lot of you have at least heard of Strangler Lewis. The lineage of the original world title is a little bumpy because back then there weren't really organized, cohesive wrestling promotions. There were promoters who put together shows and booked wrestlers, and champions were just sort of generally recognized. Sometimes state athletic commissions would officially recognize champions, which afforded a bit more legitimacy, but that wasn't always the case. And there were sometimes disputes as to who was the rightful champion, disputes which couldn't always be resolved by appealing to a higher authority because there often wasn't one. Through the occasional dispute or vacancy, the lineage of the original world title can be traced back to 1905 and George Hackenschmidt. On May 4th, 1905, in New York City, at the second Madison Square Garden, in fact, Hackenschmidt defeated Tom Jenkins to become the first recognized, undisputed World Heavyweight Wrestling Champion. Hackenschmidt was already recognized in Europe as the World Greco-Roman Heavyweight Champion. Jenkins was the American Heavyweight Champion. Now, here's where we get into murkier territory as far as the lineage of the original world title. Virtually everyone agrees that the history of that title begins with Hackenschmidt versus Jenkins in 1905. But when Hackenschmidt defeated Jenkins, the European version of the World Greco-Roman heavyweight title that Hackenschmidt already held was retired. If we interpret that as the European version of the World Greco-Roman title being unified with the new World Heavyweight title, then we can incorporate that title's lineage, which goes back to 1886, into that of the World Heavyweight title. Most people don't. But remember, our main subject here is the Lineal World Heavyweight title, and if we're following the conventions of a lineal championship, it seems reasonable to me to acknowledge the lineages that fed into the creation of that championship. So, if we accept the history of Hackenschmidt's World Greco-Roman Championship as part of the lineage of the original World Heavyweight title, and therefore also the Lineal World Heavyweight title, that allows us to trace it back to 1886. But there's also the American Heavyweight title that Tom Jenkins held going into that match with Hackenschmidt. Jenkins's American title was not officially on the line in the match, and in fact, Jenkins remained the recognized American heavyweight champion and defended the title for over a year before losing it to Frank Gotch in 1906. But if we treat the American heavyweight championship as a lineal title, then Jenkins did lose the lineal American heavyweight championship to Hackenschmidt on May 4th, 1905. The history of the American heavyweight championship dates back to 1881. Like I said, it requires a bit of a leap, as well as the assumption that Hackenschmidt and Jenkins were both the lineal as well as official holders of their championships at the time of their match, which I'm honestly not sure of. But if you're willing to take that leap, we can say that the Lineal World Wrestling Championship dates back to the year 1881. Which is before professional wrestling as we would recognize it even existed. But come on, that was a long time ago, 1881. That's pretty cool, right? Let's go back to Lou Thesz in 1957, because that's where the more solid, easier to trace, widely accepted history of the Lineal World Championship really begins. That history from Thesz up to today is traced step by step in an excellent post to the Squared Circle subreddit written by WWE Walking Dead fan. And it's a fascinating tour through the last almost 70 years of pro wrestling in mostly North America. The National Wrestling Alliance, a confederation of regional wrestling promotions, which each operated within a defined geographical area and maintained a working agreement to not compete with each other and to recognize a single world champion who traveled from territory to territory, was the dominant wrestling organization in North America until the mid-1980s. That being the case, it's no surprise that the Lineal World title remained within the NWA for the entirety of the 1960s and most of the 1970s. The title was held by such luminaries as Pat O'Connor, Buddy Rogers, Gene Kiniski, Harley Race, and Terry Funk, all of whom would also hold the officially recognized NWA World Championship, though not always at the same time as they were the Lineal champion. But because of the nature of the Lineal title, which considers every match where the championship could be on the line to be a title match, wrestlers like Bobo Brazil, Johnny Valentine, Fritz von Erich, Ernie Ladd, Mil Mascaras, Freddie Blassie, Baron von Raschke, and The Sheik, who never held the NWA World title, were Lineal World Champions as well. Though its dominance meant the NWA was nearly always the only game in town in the 60s and 70s, it wasn't the only game in the country. One of the most successful non-NWA wrestling promotions was the AWA, owned by Vern Gagne, who was also its top star and perennial world champion during this era. The AWA was based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and its territory encompassed much of the Midwestern United States, as well as cities further west such as San Francisco and parts of central Canada. Though the AWA was not part of the NWA, Gagne maintained good relations with NWA promoters, which allowed AWA and NWA wrestlers to occasionally work together. As a result, the Lineal World Championship jumped from the NWA to the AWA for almost 2 years, from February 1977, when AWA mainstay Nick Bockwinkel won it, to December 1978, when Bockwinkel, already in his 6th reign with the title, lost it to Andre the Giant. Besides Bockwinkel, who was also the officially recognized AWA World Heavyweight Champion this entire time, the Lineal World title was also held by top AWA stars like Ray Stevens, Larry the Axe Hennig, Billy Robinson, and Vern Gagne himself. Once Andre the Giant won it from Bockwinkel in December of 1978, the Lineal title didn't move for over 5 years. One of the benefits of being Andre the Giant is that you don't lose very much. Andre remained the Lineal World Champion until January 1984, when he lost to UWA World Champion El Canek in the main event of the UWA 9th Anniversary show in Naucalpan, Mexico. Not only was El Canek one of the few people to defeat Andre by pinfall, he also body-slammed the Giant, more than 3 years before Hulk Hogan did so famously at WrestleMania 3. Speaking of Hulk Hogan, the Lineal World title remained with the UWA for the next 6 months or so. Then it passed to New Japan Pro Wrestling star Tatsumi Fujinami, who defeated El Canek at a New Japan show in Osaka. And from there, in February of 1985, it passed from Fujinami to Hulk Hogan. Once again, the title history settles down for a while at this point. Just like Andre, Hulk Hogan in the 80s didn't lose many matches. In fact, he didn't lose any matches by pinfall from January of 1984 until February of 1988, when he lost to Andre the Giant on the main event in a rematch of their historic bout at WrestleMania 3. Andre's victory was tainted. He benefited from a crooked referee who was the identical twin of the referee who was supposed to officiate the match, in case you need a reminder that we're talking about pro wrestling here. And as a result, the WWF Championship, which had been held by Hogan up to that point, was vacated. But the WWF Championship ain't the Lineal Championship, so while Andre was not allowed to keep the WWF title, he did retain the completely imaginary Lineal World title until July 31st of that same year, when he lost a steel cage match in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to Hulk Hogan. And from that point forward, the Lineal World Championship has belonged exclusively to the WWF, now the WWE. For a while, it traveled along with the WWF Championship, passing from Hogan to the Ultimate Warrior, from the Warrior to Sergeant Slaughter, then back to Hogan, to The Undertaker, then back to Hogan. At the 1993 King of the Ring, Hogan lost it at the same time as he lost the WWF title to Yokozuna. Yokozuna lost it to Lex Luger at a USWA show in Memphis in August of 1993, where they were both booked thanks to the WWF's working relationship with the USWA at the time. Luger actually held on to it for a year before losing it back to Yokozuna, who lost it to The Undertaker, who eventually lost it to Mabel when Mabel defeated him at the 1995 King of the Ring. For the decade leading up to that point, the Lineal title had been held by WWF wrestlers who were either also the WWF champion, or if they weren't, were at least in the mix for that title. But after Mabel beat The Undertaker at King of the Ring in 1995, he lost to Razor Ramon, who was a contender for the Intercontinental title, which is a secondary championship to the WWF title. At SummerSlam, on August 27, Razor lost a ladder match to the reigning Intercontinental champion Shawn Michaels, making Michaels both the WWF Intercontinental champion and the Lineal World Heavyweight Champion. Michaels would lose the Lineal World title to Bret Hart at a house show in March of 1996, then regain it from Bret at WrestleMania 12 later that same month, and once again the Lineal and WWF championships would mostly ride together from that point on. The Lineal title bounced around between WWF/WWE main eventers for the rest of the late 1990s and into the early 2000s, held multiple times by Michaels, Undertaker, Steve Austin, Mick Foley, The Rock, Triple H, Chris Jericho, Eddie Guerrero, Kurt Angle, Kane, and other top stars of that era. Throughout the late 2000s and early 2010s, it was passed around amongst Randy Orton, John Cena, Batista, Booker T, CM Punk, Edge, and others. On the January 31st, 2011 episode of Monday Night Raw, Edge defeated The Miz to become the Lineal World Champion for the 7th time. Then something interesting happened. Following WrestleMania that year, Edge, who was also the reigning WWE World Heavyweight Champion, which was a separate title from the WWE Championship, which, again, is a whole other conversation, announced his retirement due to a neck injury. Edge relinquished his WWE World Heavyweight title, and a new champion was crowned a couple of weeks later. But that's not how the Lineal Championship works. You can't just vacate the Lineal title and hold a tournament or something to crown a new champion. Because a Lineal Championship is just a conceptual title rather than an actual officially recognized one, there's no governing body to decide what happens when there's an interruption in the lineage. The only commonly accepted way to determine a new lineal champion if a reigning champion retires is if there is a commonly recognized undisputed world champion. Given the nature of modern professional wrestling, that's not likely to happen anytime soon, or ever. And it certainly didn't happen after Edge retired in 2011. That being the case, it looked like the history of the Lineal World Heavyweight Wrestling Championship, which stretched back at least to 1957, arguably back to 1905, and perhaps, if you're willing to really stretch, back as far as 1881, would finally definitively end in 2011. 130 years from the days when wrestling was sometimes kinda sorta a legitimate sport, to the time of Hackenschmidt and Gotch, to the 1910s and 20s and the beginning of the more theatrical slam-bang Western-style wrestling that eventually evolved into pro wrestling as we know it today, that's a pretty good run. No officially recognized championship could even come close to such a long and storied legacy. But then, in 2020, something even more unexpected than Edge's retirement happened. Edge came out of retirement. Okay, wrestlers coming out of retirement isn't unexpected. It happens all the time. But wrestlers who were forced to retire due to serious injuries coming out of retirement 9 years later, that's fairly uncommon. With Edge's return, the Lineal World title was back in play as well. In June of 2020, Edge lost to Randy Orton. In August of 2020, Orton lost to Drew McIntyre. In October, McIntyre lost to Orton. In November, Orton lost to McIntyre. Less than a week later, McIntyre lost to Roman Reigns, who in August had won the WWE Universal Championship. Yes, that's yet another main event level title that is distinct from the other titles I've mentioned already, and who would go on to unify the Universal title with the WWE title and would not lose a singles match by pinfall or submission for 3.5 years. Then, on April 7th of this year, 2024, if you're watching this in the future, Cody Rhodes defeated Roman Reigns in the main event of WrestleMania 40, winning the WWE Championship, officially the WWE Undisputed Universal Championship. Christ, what a mouthful. With its lineage reaching back to the first officially recognized WWF champion Buddy Rogers in 1963, and simultaneously winning the Lineal World Heavyweight Wrestling Championship, a made-up title that means nothing to anyone except marks with too much time on their hands like me, but a made-up title with a history that encompasses the entirety of the existence of professional wrestling and places Cody Rhodes, my favorite currently active wrestler by the way, on a line that connects him all the way back to George Hackenschmidt, the original undisputed World Heavyweight Champion. I think Cody could take him, honestly. Hackenschmidt defeated Tom Jenkins to win that original world title using a half Nelson. A half Nelson! Cody could kick out of that. But could Hackenschmidt kick out of a crossroads? Actually, he probably could. A lot of people kick out of it. It's a weak finish. But could he kick out of 3 crossroadses in a row? I think not. Ha ha!